All right, to start off this first topic for lesson 1, I'm going to say that this video is one of the optional videos. Now again, what I mean by that is if you're in Algebra 1, and you know if you are, this is still required. This video, you need to watch the whole thing and take notes on it. If you are not in the Algebra 1 section, I still recommend kind of breezing through from, just scroll ahead and make sure that everything that you see in this video is something you understand. That's really what I mean by optional. If you don't understand it, then you should watch the video. If you do understand it, if this is a review from Algebra 1 for you, which it should be, and if it's something you remember, then you can skip on to the next topic. That doesn't mean skip to the next lesson. You can skip to the next topic and check to make sure if it is required or optional. All right, so to get started, I want you to take a look at my screen here. We have a parabola, a quadratic function. In particular, this is the y equals x squared function. Now, remember, as we talked about during the introduction, that if I use a t-chart, and we'll do x and y, if we look at just the values of x, -2 to 1, just the integers from -2 to 2 rather, if we plug those values in, let's start with 0 into our equation, which is right here. We could say 0, we plug in 0 squared equals 0. So if x is 0, y is 0. If we plug in 1, we said we'd plug in 1 here. 1 squared, 1 times 1 is 1. So y is 1 when x is 1. If I plug in 2, I have 2 squared, that's 4. So when x is 2, y is 4. And then we looked at the negative. So those are 0, 1, and 2 for x. Now let's look at -1 and -2. If I plug in a -1 for x, what that means is I'm doing -1 squared, or -1 times -1. Negative times a negative is positive. So even though I plug in a -1 for x, I get a positive y, +1 for y. And if I plug in a -2 for x, I get -2 times -2, which is +4. And so we notice that everything in the y column is positive. Doesn't matter if it's positive or negative in the x value. And we see that reflected, again, this is all review from class, we see that reflected in the parabola. So the lowest value on our parabola in the y direction, remember this is our y axis, the lowest value is 0. Everything else is 0 or above. It's all positive. Okay, so let's think about an equation that resembles this kind of graph. So for instance, instead of saying graph y equals squared, actually let me write that all out, graph, that's kind of what we just did. Actually, that's exactly what we just did. I'm going to say, what if you got a question that said, not graph y equals x squared, but solve 4 equals x squared? And I want us to think about what that means. So here we just graphed y equals x squared. Now I'm asking you, what does it mean to solve for 4 equals x squared? Now first, what's the difference between graphing this function and solving this equation? Well, the most obvious is that there's no more y. In the first option, we have an x and we have a y, and we use that relationship to create a graph. In our second question, we only have an x, and in fact the y has been replaced with the number 4. So what does that mean? Mathematically, that's what we want to ask. What does that mean? Well, it's related, I will give you a hint, to the graph that we've already drawn. Y equals x squared is a relationship, and at each point, the x value, like, I know I'm repeating, but I'm going to say it in a different context, 1 and an x value causes us to get 1 in a y value. 2 in an x value causes us to get 4 as a y value. So we're creating that relationship. So what I'm really asking here is, when on the graph does x squared give us an answer of 4? So think about it according to our t-chart again over here. Where on this t-chart do I get a value, an answer of 4? And what we find is interesting when we talk about parabolas is that there's more than one answer. So see on our chart, let me use a different color. Let's say we'll use pink here. 4 appears when x is -2, and it also appears when x is +2, because of that interesting relationship between a square and the fact that we always get positive answers. So here, if x is 2, we get 4. If x is -2, we get 4. And so what does it mean to solve that 4 equals x squared? What it means is to say we get an answer of 4 anytime that x equals 2 or that x equals -2. And now we've solved. That's it. So that is the relationship between a question that asks us to graph an x and y quadratic relationship and a question that asks us to solve an equation with x squared in it. Now we're going to talk more about this in the next topic video, but that is our introduction to what it means to solve quadratic equations.